All right, so before we jump in further into some of our guests and into some of the presentations on the product details, I thought it would be helpful to start out by giving you a sense for what we've seen out in the market, talking to many of you and many other large organizations around the world. And what we see is what you see here, which is that we have now all shifted into a new competitive landscape where the way that we actually measure our competitive strength is based on the experiences that are delivered in our digital applications. And the expectations around those applications have been ever rising higher and higher because all of us as individuals, whether we're in our role as employees or whether we're in our role as consumers, we have come to expect beautifully designed, highly performant, simple experiences in our digital applications. And that's a bar that's been set for us by companies that were born in the cloud, design-led, digital from their inception, the Googles, the Ubers, the Facebooks of the world. But now it doesn't matter what industry you're in, right? If you're a transportation company, a healthcare company, financial services company, retail company, it doesn't matter, right? You now are held to that same bar because whether you're delivering applications internally to your employees or externally to your customers, they are expecting as individuals to have that same beautiful, highly performing, well-designed experience that is effective. And if you can't deliver it, you actually become competitively disadvantaged from those who can. So we've done a survey called the App Attention Index, where we actually got some quantitative data around how important these experiences are. And these are a few of the highlights here. So 49% of the respondents in the survey said that they actually switched suppliers because of a poor digital experience. Think about that. Half of people effectively are willing to leave because the digital experience isn't meeting those expectations. On the other side of that coin, you've got 50% also who are willing to pay more for your service if it's better than a competitor's, right? So there's the downside and the upside there. And we also know from research that's been done that if you have even 100 milliseconds of latency on a page load, that you can lose up to 1% of the sales volume that you otherwise would have had. So think about that, 100 milliseconds of latency, 1% of sales. It's enormously expensive when things don't work right and you're not delivering the competitive experiences that are up to par with those user expectations and beating that of your competitors. And so what is this driving? It's driving a change in the technologies that we all rely upon so that we can actually deliver these experiences. We've had historically these three sort of epic shifts in technology and IT, broadly speaking, from mainframes to client server and from client server to web technologies. But none of those technologies have been able to allow us to move with the agility and the velocity that is required for a world where experience is the competitive currency. And the reason for that is that the way you win in a world where experience is the competitive currency is you have to iterate very, very quickly with high velocity. Because one thing that we know is that executives sitting in a conference room, cooking up an experience and putting it into an application are going to get it wrong about 100% of the time, right? The way you actually get the winning experience is you iterate very quickly with user research, you implement hypotheses that are informed by that research quickly in code, you get the code in front of users, you have real-time data and telemetry that gives you a view into what's working and what's not. You readjust your hypothesis, you re-implement in code, and you turn that crank as fast as you can, right? And the more shots on goal, the faster you can go through that iterative cycle, the more quickly you beat the competitors to what is actually the performing and winning experience that pleases them, allows them to get done what they're trying to accomplish in your app, and produces the winning business experience. That is what is driving the adoption of cloud and microservices. It offers the promise as a technology stack of being able to take smaller, more agile teams, allow them to take smaller components of an application experience and iterate on it in a very quick, high-velocity way with those rapid cycle times that are going to allow them to get to the winning experience, right? So that's great. That's the promise of it. But there's also a downside, which is those other 3 generations of technology haven't gone away. We're running large enterprise organizations. We can't throw away all of our technology investments from the past decade or more. And so we end up with environments that typically look something like this. They're hybrid, they're multi-cloud, they're distributed, and they're complex. We may prioritize putting some of the experience-driven components of our application out, let's say, in the most modern, fastest moving cloud technologies where we can iterate quickly, but it may be talking in the same application to client server or to web technologies, and even accessing in many of our organizations data that is still being driven out of mainframes. And in that kind of an environment, things have to still work together seamlessly to deliver that flawless experience. It's really hard to do, and one of the things that makes it incredibly hard to do is the human part of this, which is that we're running organizations that still have historical roles and operating processes. And so you see situations like this, where you're typically going to have an app team that is focused on the application topologies and the technologies that are at the upper layers of the stack, and you have infrastructure teams that are now managing this complex, diverse array of different infrastructure technology stacks, and they tend to be focused on those infrastructure technologies and the workload management of them. And these two perspectives that are represented by these two organizations actually make it harder for us to move with the velocity that we need. And that results in situations that sometimes look like this, which is the typical IT war room. Something's going wrong. The business has moved into the application, and you've got something wrong and people are finger pointing. Right? They're saying, hey, my system says the data here, I'm looking good. Your system says, oh, yours is looking good too. Well, something must not really be wrong. But over on the other side of the hallway, you've got the business users who are now prosecuting their business initiatives inside your application. And they're pulling their hair out because the business results are suffering. And they're not able to achieve the results that they depend on because of problems with application performance or application experience. And the costs when that happens are unacceptably high, right? We know that about half of organizations, when they have an outage, it's costing them in hard dollars $100,000, and almost a quarter are having incidents that are at $500,000 each. And when you then consider the fact that in many organizations that we go in and work with, they're having outages as frequently as multiple times per week. In some cases, we've gone into organizations that are having outages multiple times per day. And this doesn't even speak of the reputational damage and the user ill will that I spoke about earlier, where we know there's an abandonment rate that you actually are subject to when your users leave and actually go speak badly about your application, not even captured in these numbers. So it becomes enormously expensive. So this begs the question of what do we do about it, right? Well, we've got to start working differently. The operating model of most of our organizations, when we zoom out to look at the whole organization, is still often siloed between business teams, development teams, and the operations teams. The problem is that when the business is in the application, it means the business initiatives are now coded. And when the infrastructure that the operations teams are managing is also now being coded by developers who are using cloud technologies and modern DevOps techniques, you have to take these three teams and get them to move together in lockstep and coordinate with one another. And this is what we call BizDevOps as an operating model. It just expresses this notion that these previously separate siloed teams have to come together in this intimate, tight loop operating model where they make decisions together, they plan together, they execute together, they assess and evaluate together, and they go round and round together, because if they can do that, they can achieve the velocity that allows you to iterate and again get to the winning experience. If they fail to do it, you are a laggard and you face an existential threat of being disrupted by the competitors who are able to do this well. Now, when you look at how to actually make the transition to that BizDevOps operating model, you have to start looking at some of the challenges within operations. Because even within just the operations silo, there are sub-silos. And we typically see separate sub-teams for app ops and infra ops and network ops and sec ops, and they're all typically using separate tools that they've built up over what is oftentimes a decade or more that they're loyal to. And they're different sources of truth with different data sets that they each believe, but which don't necessarily correlate or apply any sort of consistency of a view across the different teams. So what we've been doing at AppDynamics in partnership with Cisco is beginning to lay the foundation of solving this problem broadly by upgrading these traditional legacy controllers, these legacy systems, to modern software-based domain controllers that bring software intelligence and smarts and open data interfaces to each of those traditional control systems so that data can be exchanged and correlated that allows these different personas within the organization to still use a tool that's familiar or of choice, but to actually see the same correlated view of data expressed through their tool of choice. So that when they show up in those war rooms now, instead of finger pointing, they're actually looking at a single shared source of truth with correlated data up and down across the different layers of the stack that allow them to move into a higher velocity operating model. And this is a vision that we have that we refer to as the central nervous system for IT. It's the vision that we announced last year. It's been a very exciting year of progress and innovation. And a lot of the rest of the event, we're going to be sharing with you quite a bit more detail around the progress that we've made over the past year in building out the strategy, as well as in delivering and paying off some of the promises as we continue down the path of what we believe will be a 10-year journey to really fully modernize these systems.